Imagine a goddess so beautiful that her mere presence could calm raging seas and stir the purest passion in the hearts of mortals and immortals alike. Now consider that the birth of this same goddess is shrouded in mystery, controversy, and a dash of cosmic violence. Welcome to the intriguing story of the birth of Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of love and beauty, whose origins are as fascinating as they are enigmatic. Aphrodite's birth is one of the most peculiar and least understood episodes in Greek mythology. Unlike most of the Olympian gods, whose genealogies are relatively well established, Aphrodite's origins are nebulous, with conflicting versions that challenge even the most dedicated scholars of mythology. This mystery is not just an academic curiosity, but a fascinating reflection of how ancient civilizations understood and represented abstract concepts such as love, beauty, and desire through mythical narratives. The best-known and, curiously, most bizarre version of Aphrodite's birth comes from Hesiod's Theogony, an epic poem from the 8th century BC that narrates the origin of the gods. According to Hesiod, Aphrodite was born from the foam of the sea, but not in a way that we would call conventional, even by mythological standards. The story begins with Uranus, the primordial god of the sky, and Gaia, the goddess of the earth. Uranus, in his tyrannical reign, confined his children to Gaia's womb, causing her great suffering. Tired of this situation, Gaia convinced her youngest son, Cronus, to rebel against his father. Armed with a sickle provided by Gaia, Cronus ambushed Uranus and, in an act of violence that was shocking even by mythological standards, castrated his own father. Uranus' genitals were then thrown into the sea, where they mixed with the foam of the waves. From this unusual mixture of divine blood, semen, and seawater, Aphrodite emerged, fully formed and radiant in her divine beauty. This narrative, strange as it may seem to modern eyes, carries with it a profound symbolism. The violence of the act that precedes Aphrodite's birth can be interpreted as a metaphor for the often turbulent and irrational nature of love and desire. The sea foam, ephemeral and unstable, reflects the volatile nature of the emotions associated with love. The fact that Aphrodite is born fully formed suggests the idea of love as a primordial and eternal force, not subject to gradual development like mortal beings. It is interesting to note that this version of the myth also establishes a direct connection between Aphrodite and the sea, an element that remained associated with the goddess throughout Greek mythology. It is no coincidence that many of Aphrodite's epithets and titles refer to the sea, such as Anadyomene, emerging from the sea, or pelagic, of the open sea. This maritime association not only reflects her mythical origins, but can also be seen as an allusion to the importance of the sea to ancient Greek civilization, a maritime society par excellence. However, as is common in Greek mythology, there is an alternative, less dramatic version of Aphrodite's birth. This second version, popularized by Homer in the Iliad, presents Aphrodite simply as the daughter of Zeus and Dione. This more conventional genealogy, although less rich in symbolism, has its own interesting implications. By making Aphrodite the daughter of the king of the gods, this version elevates her status in the Olympian pantheon and places her on a par with other great gods such as Apollo and Athena. The coexistence of these two conflicting versions of Aphrodite's origins is no mere accident or mythological inconsistency. It reflects the complex and multifaceted nature of love and beauty, concepts that the goddess embodies. Hesiod's version, with its unusual and violent birth, captures the irrational, unpredictable, and sometimes disturbing aspect of love. The more conventional Homeric version can be seen as a representation of love in its most serene and harmonious aspect, an integral part of the divine order established by Zeus. This duality in Aphrodite's origins is also echoed in the different facets of her worship and representation throughout Greek history. On the one hand, Aphrodite was revered as Urania, the celestial Aphrodite, patroness of pure and spiritual love. On the other, she was worshipped as Pandemos, the Aphrodite of all peoples, associated with physical love and earthly passions. These two seemingly contradictory faces of the goddess reflect the Greek understanding of love as a force that encompasses both the sublime and the carnal. The impact of the myth of Aphrodite's birth was not limited to the religious and mythological spheres. It had a profound and lasting influence on art and literature, not only in ancient Greece but throughout the history of Western culture. The image of Aphrodite emerging from the waves of the sea has become one of the most frequently used and celebrated motifs in art, from antiquity to modern times. One of the most famous examples of this influence is Sandro Botticelli's painting The Birth of Venus, created in the 15th century during the Italian Renaissance. In this masterpiece, Botticelli depicts Venus, the Roman equivalent of Aphrodite, emerging from the sea on a seashell, in a clear reference to the Greek myth. The ethereal beauty and graceful pose of the goddess in Botticelli's painting perfectly capture the idea of Aphrodite as the epitome of divine beauty. It is fascinating to observe how such an ancient and, in some ways, bizarre myth could be transformed into one of the most iconic and aesthetically pleasing images in the history of art. This transformation illustrates the enduring power of Greek myths and their ability to inspire and influence human creativity through the centuries. In addition to its influence on visual art, The Birth of Aphrodite has also left its mark on literature. Poets and writers of all ages have been inspired by this narrative, using it as a metaphor for the emergence of love and beauty in the world. In romantic poetry, for example, it is not uncommon to find allusions to the Venus Anadyomene, the goddess emerging from the waves, as a symbol of ideal love or transcendent beauty. But the fascination with The Birth of Aphrodite is not limited to its aesthetic or literary value alone. For students of mythology and ancient religion, this myth offers a unique window into the mindset and values of ancient Greek society. The way the Greeks conceived of the birth of their goddess of love reveals much about their attitudes toward love, sexuality, and gender relations. For example, the fact that Aphrodite was born without a mother in some versions of the myth can be interpreted as a reflection of patriarchal Greek society. At the same time, the power and influence attributed to Aphrodite in mythology suggests a recognition of female power, even though it was often feared or viewed with suspicion by male gods. Another intriguing aspect of the myth is the connection it establishes between violence and creation. Cronus's violent act against Uranus results in the birth of a goddess associated with love and beauty. This juxtaposition of violence and beauty, destruction and creation, is a recurring theme in Greek mythology and reflects a worldview that recognizes the coexistence and even interdependence of seemingly opposing forces. It is important to note that despite its popularity and influence, the myth of Aphrodite's birth was not universally accepted or interpreted in the same way throughout the Greek world. Different city-states and regions had their own variations and interpretations of the myth, often adapting it to suit local traditions and values. For example, in Cyprus, an island strongly associated with the cult of Aphrodite, there were local traditions that linked the birth of the goddess to specific places on the island's coast. These local variations not only enriched the myth, but also served to strengthen the connections between the goddess and the communities that worshipped her. As the cult of Aphrodite spread throughout the Mediterranean and beyond, the myth of her birth also traveled, being adapted and reinterpreted by different cultures. In ancient Rome, for example, Aphrodite was assimilated to the goddess Venus, and her birth myth was incorporated into Roman mythology, albeit with some subtle modifications that reflected Roman values and sensibilities. A particularly intriguing aspect of the myth of Aphrodite's birth is its possible connection to older mythological traditions from the Near East. Some scholars argue that the story of Aphrodite emerging from the sea may have its roots in Mesopotamian and Phoenician myths about goddesses of love and fertility. This theory is supported by similarities between Aphrodite and goddesses such as Ishtar and Astarte, suggesting a complex cultural exchange that spanned the ancient Mediterranean. This possible Eastern origin of the myth adds another layer of complexity to the figure of Aphrodite. She becomes not just a Greek goddess, but a symbol of the cultural syncretism that characterized the ancient world. The idea of a goddess born from the sea may have resonated particularly with the Greeks, a seafaring people par excellence, leading them to adopt and adapt this foreign myth into their own mythology. The birth of Aphrodite also raises fascinating questions about the nature of divinity in the Greek conception. Unlike the traditional Olympian gods, who are born from unions between gods or between gods and mortals, Aphrodite emerges from an almost alchemical process, a blending of divine and natural elements. This unique origin can be seen as a reflection of the unique nature of love and beauty, forces that the Greeks saw as transcending normal categories of existence. Furthermore, the fact that Aphrodite is born fully formed suggests a view of love and beauty as primordial forces, not subject to development or change. This conception contrasts with the more dynamic view of other aspects of life and nature in Greek mythology, where growth, change, and even decline are recurring themes. The story of Aphrodite's birth also invites us to reflect on Greek attitudes towards sexuality and reproduction. The fact that such a powerful and influential goddess could be born from an act of sexual violence and mutilation may seem shocking to modern sensibilities. However, for the ancient Greeks, this narrative may have served as a way to explore and make sense of the more disturbing and irrational aspects of human sexuality. Interestingly, despite her violent origins, Aphrodite is generally portrayed as a positive force in Greek mythology, associated with love, beauty, and harmony. This transformation of chaos and violence into beauty and love can be seen as a metaphor for the transformative power of love, capable of creating order and beauty out of chaos. The myth of Aphrodite's birth also offers insights into Greek attitudes towards the sea. For a civilization so dependent on the sea for trade, communication, and expansion, it is not surprising that one of its most important goddesses would be associated with this element. The sea, in the Greek mind, was both a source of opportunity and danger, a duality reflected in Aphrodite's ambivalent nature, capable of inspiring both the most sublime love and the most destructive passions. As we explore this fascinating myth, it is important to remember that for the ancient Greeks, these stories were not mere fables or entertainment. They were a vital part of their understanding of the world, a way of making sense of the natural and emotional forces that shaped their lives. The birth of Aphrodite, with all its strangeness and beauty, was an attempt to explain and personify the mysterious and often overwhelming power of love and desire. In our modern age, where love and sexuality are often viewed through the lenses of psychology and biology, it can be difficult to fully appreciate the power and meaning these myths held for the ancients. However, by studying and reflecting on stories like the birth of Aphrodite, we can gain a new appreciation for the richness and depth of ancient mythological thought. Furthermore, these stories continue to resonate with us on deep and often unconscious levels. The image of a goddess of beauty emerging from the waves of the sea continues to capture our imagination, just as it did for the Greeks thousands of years ago. Perhaps this is a testament to the enduring power of these myths and their ability to touch something fundamental in the human psyche. As we conclude our exploration of the birth of Aphrodite, it is impossible not to be struck by the richness and complexity of this seemingly simple myth. From a story of violence and chaos, a goddess who embodies love and beauty emerges. From an act of destruction, a force of creation and harmony is born. These contradictions and paradoxes lie at the heart of not only this myth, but of Greek mythology as a whole. The birth of Aphrodite reminds us that love, like the goddess who embodies it, is a complex and multifaceted force. It can emerge in the most unlikely places, transform chaos into beauty, and has the power to influence gods and mortals alike. As we contemplate this myth, we are invited to reflect on the nature of love in our own lives, its mysterious origins, its transformative power, and its ability to create beauty even in the most unlikely circumstances. Thus, the mystery of Aphrodite's birth remains as intriguing today as it was to the ancient Greeks. It continues to challenge us, to inspire us, and to remind us of the eternal power of love and beauty. And perhaps, in this increasingly complex and often chaotic world, we need more than ever the promise embodied by Aphrodite, the promise that even from the most turbulent waters, something of transcendent beauty can emerge.